Hello, welcome to my February 2024 reading journal wrap-up video. When I posted my video last month for January, I got so many comments saying that you guys loved this content and wanted me to continue the series. And great news for you, I not only was already intending to continue the series and do one of these every month, but I also really kind of want to integrate more reading content into this channel as a whole and reading journal content because I love it, you guys love it, so it's really just a win-win situation. So if you guys want to see more reading content from me, definitely subscribe because it's definitely coming. I have so many fun videos planned and I can't wait to just talk about books with you guys. And that's what we're here for today. So let's talk about the books that I read in February 2024. Just as a general overview before we get into the books, so I'm going to be decorating these spreads today with the scrapbooky style like I did last month, and I'm really going to be leaning into this sticker sheet from Sticky. It is very cherry blossom themed with women and fans and super cool drawings and artwork. I'll try to find the artist and tag her here on the screen because the art is just beautiful, so I really wanted to lean into that this month for this setup. And then I'm also just going to be using various types of vintage paper. As you can see, I found one with fans on it, so it really matches this style. Also just other flowers and pink motifs throughout the rest of the setup. While I continue making this spread, I want to thank Online Labels for very kindly sponsoring this video. Online Labels makes my absolute favorite sticker paper, and everyone asks me all the time on my channel who makes the sticker paper that I use, and it is Online Labels. I've partnered with them before and I absolutely love their company, and I use their sticker paper all the time in my bullet journal, whether it's for doing art, specifically like alcohol markers, because any alcohol marker will bleed through, but it really doesn't matter because you're just going to stick it into your journal directly. Or in this case here, I'm writing the word February with calligraphy on sticker paper, and it makes it super easy, especially for layering, because all I have to do is peel off the back and I can stick it right on top of all my other pieces of scrapbooking in this spread. I have used Online Labels also for making stickers for my Etsy shop that I used to have and for my online shop, and also for making printables that I sell. They're super easy because you can just print whatever you need to on sticker paper, peel off the back, and then again stick it right into your journal. If you want to try Online Labels, I highly recommend their brand. And so I have a link in the description box below for you to use, as well as this code here on the screen to get money off of your purchase at checkout. Once again, thank you so much to Online Labels for sponsoring this video, and let's get into the statistics for the books that I'm reading this month. Okay, so let's talk about stats real quick. So on the right side of this spread, I'm going to have my stats page, but just as an overview, I read 4 books as of the time I'm recording this video, but actually right now, the day after I filmed, I finished another book last night. So technically I read 5 books in February, but we're just going to call it 4. I read 2,073 pages this month, which is actually double from what I read last month because I read mostly novellas last month. My average rating was 4 stars, but that's because I had 1 3-star, 1 5-star, then the rest are in the middle, but we'll talk about that a little later. My average emotions and moods of the books that I read this month. So this is actually a lot different than last month, thank the Lord. Last month I was talking about how all of my books were like dark and emotional and intense, and those were the emotions of all the books, which is true. And I said as a joking way that maybe I should try to focus on more light, happy, fluffy reads. And good news, not intentionally, but I did end up changing my moods. Like the first mood is emotional, followed by hopeful, funny, adventure, and then mystery and dark. So honestly, hopeful, funny, adventure, those are much happier moods than last month. So a pat on the back for me. It's mostly because I really got back into really fluffy romances this month, but we'll talk about that in just a second. And lastly, as far as my reading challenge for 2024 goes, I want to read 50 books in a year and 18,000 pages. And as of right now, I'm 18% of the way through my books goal and 19% of the way through my pages goal. So I'm a little bit ahead of schedule in both of those areas, and I'm really proud of myself for that. And it's mostly because I went through a huge reading burst at the end of February, and I'm still in it right now. At the beginning of February, and I guess we can just start talking about the books right now, but at the beginning of February, I was buddy reading a book with my sister, and then after that, I was kind of reading a certain book, I'll mention in just a second, but I was kind of just slowly reading it. I was also really in a TV show mood. I was watching a lot of a TV show, and I don't know if I mentioned this last month, but when I'm in a TV show watching mood, I really can't be in a book mood. It's like I only have a specific amount of time in my days to allot to just taking in media like that. So it's like if I'm spending my time watching TV or watching movies, I'm not reading books, and vice versa. If I'm reading books, I'm usually not watching TV or movies. So I went through a little TV period, didn't read many books, weeks. But then I pulled out a fantasy out of nowhere that I got recommended online, really quickly read it, and then got into a contemporary romance binge, and that's kind of where I've been for the end of the month. So I'm really like out of a slump. I'm such a good reading mood right now, but there were like a good 2 weeks in the middle of February where I barely read anything at all. So I'm actually surprised that I got 2,000 pages out of this month, which is very impressive because it just came out of nowhere at the end of the month. So props to me for that. Okay, let's talk about the books. So the first book I read this month was Shiver by Maggie Stiefvater. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her last name. I don't know how to say it, but this is a YA fantasy novel about werewolves. And I actually first read this book when I was very young, like 13, I think, and my sister, who was 13, I recommended this book to her, and I was really nostalgic. Like, this was a book that I read when I was very young. It meant a lot to me, so I was like, you know what, if you're gonna read it, I'll buddy read it with you, and we can both read it at the same time. So it's definitely a reread for me. I read this book countless times, and so it was super fun to read with my sister. But basically the premise of this book is it's a werewolf fantasy novel, and I actually think it was a very popular novel when it first came out. It's a very classic werewolf novel, you know, the werewolf falls in love with the human kind of thing. But what really sticks out to me is it's just like a really beautifully sad book. Like, the characters are just so sad, and it's very minimally written, but it's not like dark, but it's just like cold weather, you know, depressing things are happening, people are alone. It's just like sad, you know, but it's also like deeply romantic. And I remember when I was a kid thinking this is probably the most romantic and sad book I've ever read, because I just felt so much for the characters at the time. And also the rest of the series also gets like really intense with like shooting wolves and killing off the tribe and people like dying or turning into wolves forever. It's like a lot of really sad stuff, honestly. So a fantastic book and fantastic series, but it was more the nostalgia of anything that made me rate this book 5 stars. In all honesty, this book is probably like a 4-star level. It's well written, but of course it is YA, so it's like much simpler written. However, it's just super nostalgic for me, and it was super fun to buddy read with my sister. And so overall, I gave this book 5 stars because I can't give it anything less than that, honestly. And I'm not gonna rave about it like I do other 5-star books, like, oh my gosh, the best book I've ever read, it's so amazing, because it's not. But it reminds me of when I was younger, super sad, super emotional, and I just really love this series. So that was a great start to the month. But then afterwards, I spent about 2 weeks doing basically nothing, and technically I was reading a little bit of Crescent City, which I'll talk about at the end of this video. I technically have been reading that since January, still have yet to finish it, but it wasn't really getting me anywhere. I was just like, you know, I'm just not really in a mood to read, and that's why I was watching a lot of TV and movies. But then I was watching a creator on YouTube talking about some of her best reads from last month, and one of them was this book called The Ever King, which is a fantasy novel, and the way she described it was a really quick, easy to get into, fast-paced, and also just like really fun fantasy. It's a dark fantasy, but she said it wasn't like incredibly dark, and not that that scares me at all. I read plenty of dark books and stuff like that, but basically it's not anything that's gonna like take a lot of emotional or like mental brain power to read, and that's kind of what I needed at the time. So because of that, I put a pause on House of Sky and Breath, which is Crescent City 2, and I pulled out The Ever King and started reading it. And let me tell you, when I first got into it, this book was so good. Like, it was getting 5-star behavior, honestly. That's what I'm thinking. Like, it was very engaging, very entertaining. It got into the story very quickly without a lot of like world building and build up. And also the way that the author like described things, like her descriptive words to like describe a ship or to describe the water or whatever, it's like she made even ugly things sound aesthetically pleasing just with the way that she like described things and their adjectives and stuff like that. So it was very lovely to read. However, and this was very disappointing to me because, like I said, it was going so well for so long. But however, at the 85% mark, I got the ick. So, okay, well, first let me like try to explain what this book is about briefly. It's a fantasy novel, and there's this princess named Olivia, and she lives in one world, and then there is the Ever King, and he is the king of another world, like the Sea Fae, and I think she's the Earth Fae, and they are rivals, and there's a chasm in between the worlds, and they are technically in like a war, or there's a lot of tension between the two. And then, as you can expect, somehow, and I won't get into spoilers, but they find a way to connect and things go from there. And there's also an element from the past. She met this guy named Eric Bloodsinger when she was very young, and he is also a big part of the story. So I don't want to spoil anything, but that is an overall premise. Just a classic fantasy read. Like I said, it's going to be very entertaining. It's very much giving like pirate vibes on the sea, like kind of Pirates of the Caribbean if you're really into that. But like I said, 85% mark, I got the ick because the two romance interests like, it was very specific. Like, okay, romance interests, they can say cringy things to each other and I can, you know, get past it. Like, whatever. People are going to be dramatic, especially in a fantasy when, like, lives are at risk and stuff like that. But and there's one specific scene that I won't get into the details of the character names so I don't spoil, but the two love interests were talking to each other, or I think like the girl was whispering in the guy's ear or something, and a relative was sitting in the same room and they didn't know that they were together. And it was so embarrassing reading about them having this like tender moment in front of this random guy who didn't know that these two people are together. It's so specific, but like I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. It was so embarrassing to read about, like the secondhand embarrassment. I was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, go to another room, like talk about this in the hallway, not in front of this random guy. It threw me off. So because of that and also because there were a couple plot twists at the end of the book that I didn't appreciate. I love a good plot twist. Whether I see it coming or not, I love a good plot twist, but I hate when an author puts like 15 plot twists at the end that seem like they came out of nowhere. My perfect plot twist for me is one that I didn't see coming, but once I know about it, I can be like, oh, that explains blah 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 from the beginning of the book. And this one was like, that came out of nowhere, and I feel like there was no hint at that. There was no connection. It's just like all these random bits of information being thrown at you at the end of the book. It felt sloppy and last minute. So with those two things put together, the ick plus the random plot twists, I ended up rating this book 3 stars, unfortunately. Like I said, super fun and entertaining, but the last 15% just really disappointed me. So I don't know if I'm gonna be reading the second book of this duology. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Probably leaning on won't, but it's personal preference. I still recommend this book. It's still a good book. Like a 3-star rating for me is still good because 4 and 5 stars are much harder for me to give out. Like 5 stars are incredibly rare for me, but you know, take it with a grain of salt. You may get the ick like I did. Okay, so then I was trying to think, like I really wanted to read something, but I really had to get out of fantasy because I didn't realize this, but with Crescent City, Ever King, Shiver, and also a couple books from last month, like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue last month, I've been reading so much like fantasy novels, and I just really wanted to get into some contemporary romance. Like contemporary romance is such a classic genre that I just felt like I was missing out on, and it's also February, the month of love, the perfect time to read something cheesy and fluffy and just not high stakes romance. So I pulled out a book by Abby Jimenez, and I've heard amazing things by Abby Jimenez. I've heard she has great books, easy to get into, super fun, and also has like anxiety rep and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, perfect. So I pulled out Part of Your World. Well, what I actually want to do is read Yours Truly, but that's book 2 in the series, even though it's probably more popular. So I pulled out Part of Your World first, and I actually binged this book in less than 24 hours. I am not kidding you. I started at like 10 p.m. one night, and then I read until like 45-50% that night. I did not go to bed for a hot second, and then I woke up, listened to the audiobook throughout the day, read the book later that afternoon, and I had finished it by 10 p.m. that night. It was actually insane, and it was so good. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this one is about Daniel and Alexis is a doctor. I think she's an ER nurse, or ER doctor, but I'm not 100% sure if that's her specific title, but I think she is. Anyway, she is a doctor, and she is from a family of doctors, and she has a legacy to uphold for her family of doctors in this one specific hospital. And Daniel, he lives in a very small town. He has a bed and breakfast that he runs, and it's his family's bed and breakfast, and it's basically their story about falling in love. Super cute, super fluffy, and it's Part of Your World because obviously it's like two different sides. You know, the wealthy, privileged has a standard to uphold in high society, and then there's Daniel, who lives in a small town but is full and surrounded by people who love him and support him. And it's like, do you give up your job to live with the man that you love, or do you keep your job in a stable household? It's, you know, quite predictable. And it was just very easy and very good, and I loved the book. What can I say? I think it was super easy to get into also because literally the two love interests met on like the second page, and they were talking about like the fourth page, and it was just like super fast. And I hate romances when it's like they take 20 chapters just for them to meet and talk. You don't have to fall in love. I don't like insta love books, but I want some kind of like a little bit of chemistry or a little bit of connection on the first couple pages or couple chapters so I can just be excited for the rest of the book. And this book had it so fast. So fantastic. However, there was a miscommunication trope at the end of the book that threw me. I was so disappointed because I was like, if everyone talks so highly about Abby Jimenez, I wouldn't expect there to be a miscommunication trope in her books because I hate miscommunication. However, there was, and it was incredibly frustrating. And so that third act breakup, miscommunication, made me drop it from 5 to 4 stars. Still a very good book, still highly recommend it, but it's just a little annoying at the end. Then I went on to the sequel in this series, which is Yours Truly. So this is about Alexis's best friend Bree, who is also an ER doctor, and then also Jacob, who is a new doctor in her hospital, and their relationship. And this one I liked just as much, if not a little bit better than the first one, for two reasons. One, because Jacob has anxiety, and I have intense anxiety. So it's like, wow, I relate to you so much. There were so many things that he said in this book about being socially anxious, about having to, prep before you go anywhere, think about what you want to say, feel uncomfortable in new situations, prefer to be on your own. And it's like all these specific things that I'm like, I relate to you so much. And I feel like so many people could too. So I appreciated it. Oh, also, the fact that the guy with mental health issues, or the character with mental health issues, was a guy is something that's so simple, because everyone has mental health issues, whether you're a guy or a girl, whatever. But I feel like in books, it's always the girls that have mental health issues, because they're the ones that are like free to be emotionally aware. However, the fact that the guy had it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Such a simple thing, but I'm like, I love the anxiety of representation here. The other thing that made this book better than Part of Your World is because the main character in Part of Your World had a red bob, and I can't get behind that very much. That is so specific of me, but I'm like, that just gives the most millennial energy in the entire world, is a bright red bob. And the fact that neither of the characters in Yours Truly had that hairstyle meant that book was better than the first one. So for that reason, that's my only judgment. But yeah, this second book was also just super good. A little slower to get into than the first book, just slightly, just because they didn't really talk for a little bit. But it's also super sweet because they have these like really uncomfortable situations and interactions in the hospital. When Jacob is socially awkward, Bree's like rushing around and is like frustrated at him, stuff like that. And then he writes her a letter, and they start sending letters back and forth, and it's just so sweet. And I'm just like, it makes my heart happy. This is such a cute romance. And then they go into a little bit of fake dating, and then they eventually, of course, fall in love for real. Unfortunately, there once again is a third act breakup and miscommunication trope. So again, 4 stars, not 5 stars, but both of these books were still amazing, and just a perfect book to read in the month of February, with the month of love. It's just like, it made me very happy. I read the second book in like 2 days, so overall I read both these books in like 3 days, a span of a weekend. Yeah, it was just super cool. I definitely recommend these books so much. Alright, so as you can see on the second page, I have spaces for all the books that I've talked about that I read this month, all 4 of them, but I also have a space at the bottom right page for all the books that I'm currently reading. And I did this specifically because I'm actually reading quite a few books at once this month, so I wanted to point out that although I only finished 4 books, I was reading quite a lot more than just 4 books. So continuing from last month, I am still reading Crescent City 2, House of Sky and Breath, like I mentioned. I am 40% of the way through that book. I have been for about 4 weeks. Like I said, I took a pause on it a while ago. I do intend to go back to it, but right now I'm just really on my contemporary romance phase, and so I just can't see myself going back to that world right now, because it's just such a complicated world, and I don't know, I really want to read it, especially since the sequel, or like the 3rd book in the trilogy, has come out and everyone is raving about it. But for some reason, I just feel like this one suffers a little bit from like sophomore book slump, and also I feel that I'm just not in the right headspace to be thinking about really high fantasy right now, so I'm still putting a pause on Crescent City 2. The next book is Why, Explaining the Holocaust, which is the middle book here. This is a book that I am reading for school. I'm currently 65% of the way through it, and it is a very sad but very good book. I talked about this last month. I am still reading it, obviously, because the class is slowly going through the book, but it's just very informative, and I really appreciate how this book touches on subjects that you don't normally hear about in the Holocaust. Like, for example, there is a section about how German women sometimes would join in with the Nazis and the SS in like shooting the Jews, not because they necessarily had any anti-Semitic views specifically against the Jews, but it's because they wanted to prove themselves as women that were just as good as men, so they would shoot the Jews to prove themselves. And it's like, that is such a specific fact in history that I feel like no one talks about, but it's things like that and very specific nuggets of information from the Holocaust that Peter Hayes brings up in his book. And it's just very informative, very sad, but a very good book to just kind of an overview of the Holocaust and an overall wealth of knowledge. And this is a book that I would definitely come back to, not to read all the way through, but just to come back to and like reference from if I'm doing more Holocaust classes in the future like I am now. So Very good book. Slowly working my way through it. Like I said, 65% of the way right now. Hopefully in the next couple of months I'll finish this book, and maybe this will be my one and only nonfiction book that I read in 2024. The last book that I'm technically currently reading as of the time that I'm filming this is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. However, at the time that I'm recording this voiceover, I finished that book this morning at 1 a.m. actually. I was about to say last night, it was this morning. So technically, I'm not currently reading this book, but I will say that I finished it, and I will talk about it more in my wrap-up next month for March. But just to give you a quick overview, this is a story about someone who lives in an apartment. Her name is Clementine. When she goes into the apartment one day, she realizes there's a guy there from 7 years ago, and the apartment has transported her back 7 years. And it's a story about her, him, her aunt, the apartment. It wasn't my absolute favorite romance of all time, and I will say that I rated this book 3 stars, but I still really appreciated what this book talked about, and I also really appreciated the guy character. A lot of good things in this book, just wasn't my absolute favorite. But like I said, I'll give a more cohesive review next month. And lastly, just touch on it, I started this morning after I finished 7-Year Slip. I started Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood this morning, so I just wanted to bring that one up, even though it's not here in the spread. I'm literally 5% of the way through, but so far it's turning out to be a very classic Ali Hazelwood book. I read both Love Hypothesis and Love on the Brain, and they seem to be very similar to this in that it's a STEM girl, quirky, talkative girl with a very stern, usually dark-haired, tall, broody boyfriend. And, you know, do I think she needs to kind of break out of this repetitive model that she has for her books? Yes, but they're also funny and easy to read. So I'm still going to enjoy it, and we'll see what I rate this book when I finish it next month. So those were all the books that I read in February, and my spread is done now. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, got some good inspiration, got some good book recommendations. Let me know in the comments below what you've been reading this past month or what you want to read in March. And like I said, look out in a couple weeks for some more book content coming your way. I have a fun video planned for the middle of March that I can't wait to post. So definitely subscribe so you don't miss out on any more bullet journaling or reading journaling content later down the line. Once again, I want to give a big shout out to Online Labels for sponsoring this video. If you want to check out their sticker paper, definitely use the link in my description box below and use this code on the screen to get some money off of your purchase. They are an amazing company with very high quality sticker paper, and I cannot recommend them enough. I love you guys so much, wishing you the most amazing month, and I will see you next week.